Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Poetics of. Today we're going to be doing another lyric analysis, and as you can see by the chalkboard behind me, today we're going to be taking a look at the Poetics of Samurai. So Samurai is a band from Cyberpunk 2077. They are portrayed by Refused, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be treating the band as Samurai, as like a real entity. So there's going to be a few mild spoilers for Cyberpunk 2077, so if you have not played this game yet, I recommend not watching this video until you've done so. It's such a good game, and if you were on the fence with it because it had a bit of a rough launch, please go check it out now. It's been totally fixed. There's tons of new content. There's a great DLC. It's just a really, really good game with a great story. So there's your little spoiler warning. And before we get into the actual analysis, there's just a couple things to keep in mind. All right, so some things to keep in mind. So first, this is a close reading exercise. So basically what that means is, rather than being a deep dive where we are looking at the lyrics and trying to interpret them based on, all of the lore of the entire game and, doing research on interviews and interviews with Keanu Reeves, etc., this is instead an exercise where we take a look at the text itself and see what meaning we can get just from the text, and by analyzing the different poetic techniques and devices that are being used by the lyricist. So in that sense, that's how we're going to be coming about our interpretation of the work. And so along with that, I want to remind everybody that this is just my personal interpretation. So something we sort of celebrate on this channel is the idea of the death of the author, which basically just means once a piece of writing is handed over to the audience, it's theirs to interpret, and no set interpretation is more valid than the other, especially because we all come at this process with different personal experiences and perspectives, and some of us will have consumed different pieces of media that we're going to want to draw parallels to and make comparisons to, and other people have totally different pieces of media that they're going to be making those comparisons with. So this is just sort of my personal interpretation. So I also want to make a note here that if you have your own personal interpretation you want to share, if you disagree with my analysis, or if you agree with it, or if you have any other, like I said, comparisons or parallels you want to draw, I'd love to hear that in the comments. I always have a lot of fun looking at those and seeing what you guys think of the pieces of media we're looking at. And so, sort of as a reminder to myself, I want to remind everybody to subscribe for more content like this. So here on this channel, a big series we do is the Poetics of, where we take a look at various pieces of media which are not explicitly being presented as poems, and we sort of analyze them for their poetic devices and techniques, and basically see what we can learn as writers, and see what we can kind of steal for our own writing, and also just see how we can learn more about the piece of media by looking at it through a poetic lens. So with all of that said, let's jump right into the song. Alright, so here we have the opening of the song, and at first it appears to be sort of a simple, passage, sort of a simple sentiment. We have, repetition here with we lost everything, and then, let me get another color chalk. We had to pay the price, But you have to ask yourself, when you're doing these close reading analyses, what is the author attempting to accomplish by starting off this way? And often with poetry, but also with song lyrics, we see that the opening often serves as sort of the thesis statement. So if you've ever had to write a high school essay where it's like a 3-paragraph essay, and you have your thesis statement, and then you have your 3 supporting paragraphs and your concluding paragraph. Then you'll know that your thesis statement is sort of when you state, what this whole piece is about, what you're trying to talk about, what you want people to get out of it, etc. So here we're seeing that this is going to be a song about someone who lost everything and that they had to pay the price. And through this repetition, we see that this is a point that the author really wants us to understand. They want us to understand that they are emphasizing just how much they lost everything, and that the correlation between them losing everything and them having to pay the price. So what's interesting about having to pay the price is you're usually paying the price for something. It's usually can be seen as a form of either punishment or something else. And usually with the sense of punishment, it can either be like a valid punishment, where a character pays the price for their hubris or their pride, or someone pays the price for revenge, which often means that they get hurt in the process as well, or there's sometimes it's used almost sarcastically, where it's like, oh, that's the price for freedom, or that's the price for living in America, that sort of sentiment, where you're paying the price, but it's not actually something you're trying to purchase or something you're even actively involved in. And then, so one other thing I wanted to point out beyond this repetition and the fact that this is, sort of a strong thesis statement that we'll see throughout the rest of the song is, truly reflected in the rest of the writing, is this Here, let me get a different colored chalk. So we have this here. And I find that sort of interesting because lines 2 and 4 are a direct repetition. They directly repeat themselves. But lines 1 and 3 have this difference of the here. And, it seems weird to be picking apart the use of here. However, I want to draw, your attention to how that sort of impacts the rhythm of the entire piece, and what it does to your ear as you're hearing it being read out loud. So as it is, we lost everything, we had to pay the price. Yeah, we lost everything, we had to pay the price. So if you remove that, you have we lost everything, we had to pay the price. We lost everything, we had to pay the price. And I feel like that actually kind of keeps it going in a sort of nice meter. It's not iambic pentameter, but there's sort of a nice ba-bum, ba-bum going on. So it's like, we lost everything, we had to pay the price. Yeah, we lost everything, we had to pay the price. By making this one longer, it sets up this fourth line to feel like a nice concluding statement. Because if you kept it the same, it almost feels like it could just go on forever and ever and ever, because there isn't a sort of like setup and then a conclusion. So, again, it would just be like, we lost everything, we had to pay the price. We lost everything, we had to pay the price. We lost everything, we had to pay the price. It can almost be sort of like a chant, almost like what you'd hear at like a stadium. But here, when you have that, it's sort of, it tunes your ear in to being like rhythm break, back to rhythm, which actually makes the back to rhythm be really satisfying. And I think that's sort of interesting because I know that in music composition, that's often done to sort of create a resolution where people will change the chord structure, and you'll have it where it'll be like in key, in key, in key, or standard like a 1-4-5, 1-4-5, 1-4-5, and then at some point when they want to hit that resolution, they'll go like 1-4-7-5, something like that. I'm not a great musician, but that trains your ear to find resolution. And so similarly, as poets and as writers, we can do that by messing with the meter and the rhythm. So all that said, let's jump into the next portion. All right, so now we have our next, real chunk of lyrics and poetry here. So there's a really cool image here that I'm excited to get into. But for starters, let's just go through it line by line. I'll do a quick reading. So, I saw in you what life was missing. You lit a flame that consumed my hate. I'm not one for reminiscing, but I'd trade it all for your sweet embrace. So already we find out that, this everything that this, speaker has lost is going to be you. They had to pay the price. They lost everything. That everything they lost is the you, which is the subject of the song/poem. So, and then we get this relationship between them. So I saw in you what life was missing. And then I love this line. You lit a flame that consumed my hate. So in figurative language, we have similes and metaphor. So simile is when you use like or as. So if you're to say, my love for you is like the sun, that's a simile. And a metaphor is when you sort of just say it as it is. So here he's creating a metaphor between, this you's passion and sort of just like, their own personal fire, to do a metaphor myself, which is then, becomes almost like a candle-like relationship. So this is really cool. So here you have a candle, and the candle itself is actually his hatred. And the you here, which is she, because it's Alt Cunningham most likely, so there's a little cyberpunk context. The flame is Alt. So I've never really seen an image like this where they're describing, because again, the flame of a candle is actually consuming the wax. And so here they have this candle of wax that is also, by saying that his hatred is sort of like a candle wax, it's almost like he's saying that it was already there like a candle. Just, the wick is already there, and he's just waiting for something to come around and light a flame to then consume the candle, because candles, I think it's fair to say that candles are there to be burned, and therefore their purpose is to be burned and, produce light and stuff. And also, with that of, producing light, by being the flame that lights the candle and then burns the candle and burns away the wax, because it consumes my hate. The wax is consumed in the process of a candle. When you light a candle, the candle burns out eventually and gets smaller and smaller and smaller. But it also, this process produces light. So not only is he saying that this person, lit a flame that consumed his hate, but he's also saying that that flame also produced this light in his life. So we can see just how much this person meant to him. This person's influence was not only removing this toxic negativity, but by doing so, it was also producing a new light that wasn't there, and is therefore removing the darkness as well. And it's not just the lack of hate, but it's the lack of hate plus this new production of light. So this is just a really, really good line. I want to point this out as one of my favorite lines we've looked at thus far in this whole series. So then we have, I'm not one for reminiscing, but I trade it all for your sweet embrace. And so here it's just sort of interesting, as this line sort of serves a bit to point out a bit more about the speaker themselves as we read through this poem, and as we look at the lyrics of it, we can learn more and more about the speaker themselves, even when they might not realize they're revealing so much about themselves. For example, we realize that they were a person who was full of hate, who felt like something was missing in their life, and they also don't see themselves as one who reminisces for the past. And that not only means that they're not sentimental, but it also means that perhaps they don't have much in their past to be sentimental about. Because again, they're someone who feels like life was missing something and that they are full of hate, which means they probably haven't had a lot of great experiences that are worth reminiscing on. But here he's saying he traded all for your sweet embrace. So again, that's further emphasizing that this is in fact the you is the thing that was lost, because hypothetically, if you wanted to argue that that wasn't explicit yet, now we can see that he no longer has their sweet embrace, so they are the thing that was lost. It's also sort of interesting, though, it's because they're saying they traded all for your sweet embrace, but if they've lost everything, what exactly are they trading? And in that sense, I think it's sort of that sort of sentiment which we see with Johnny Silverhand, who's the singer of this song, and within the world of cyberpunk, they are the songwriter, the lyricist of this song. Johnny very much has the sentiment of, like, I would burn down the entire city, I would attack, like, do whatever crimes were needed, whatever acts of violence were needed to try to get you back. And so in this, I don't think he's really saying he's traded all as in everything he owns, but it's more like he will trade everything, period. He'll cross any boundary, whatever, just to get Alt back. So again, Arasaka Tower, it's not something he possesses, but he'd be willing to trade it in for their sweet embrace. So I think that about wraps us up. We don't have a ton of clear rhyme scheme going on here. Missing obviously doesn't rhyme with but. Here, let me get a different color for chalk. Missing doesn't rhyme with but we get hate and kind of flame and embrace. We get some of those A sounds here. And consumed, one, not. No real, those aren't the same O sounds, so it's almost more of an I rhyme there. Reminiscing, sweet embrace. I feel like the reminiscing and embrace, those are sort of rhyming with each other there as well. And like I said, we kind of get the A sounds. But beyond that, it's not like a piece that has like a set rhyme scheme. So onward to the next portion. All right, so now we have this second passage. And there was a bit of a repetition between the last passage we looked at and this one, where they were once again just saying that they lost everything. So it's sort of a repetition of that opening passage. So here we have what I'm going to call a piece of ekphrasis. So ekphrasis basically is when a piece of writing references and describes a piece of artwork. So if you were to write a poem about the Mona Lisa, and most of your poem was just literally describing what the Mona Lisa looks like, or if you say, oh, there's a painting in a museum of a woman with a unique smile, that's ekphrasis there. So it's a technique that we see. John Keats did it in Ode on a Grecian Urn, in which the poem is a long description of this old Greek urn. And if you've ever seen those, what they look like, they have paintings that wrap around them, which have characters and kind of tell a story. And so throughout it, he's sort of musing on the story on that urn. And what's sort of interesting about that poem is no one knows for sure if he was talking about a specific urn that he actually saw, or if it was one that he invented in his imagination. Similarly here, I think this may be an imagined piece of artwork. So there's kind of a lot going on here. So some people will compare this canvas with Two Faces to being at Night City, where they'll say, it's sort of the Two Faces is sort of like the poor side and the rich side. But I'm going to argue it really is more that he is conjuring up the image of a literal painting, but that painting is in fact a fictitious painting that is supposed to be depicting the relationship between Johnny and Alt. So this could literally be as simple as he's describing a photograph of him and Alt, or dramatically a painting on a canvas. But rather than being about Night City, I really feel like this is more about him and Alt. Because if you were to imagine a photograph of here we'll say this is Johnny, and then here is Alt, which we'll do as an A, you would have a picture with two faces on it of he's calling them two fallen angels, because he thinks of himself as a fallen angel, and he also thinks of her as one because she's beautiful, etc. It's a bit of an egotistical remark, but also sort of like the whole punk rock of them being demons, etc. But you have a fallen angels, one who loved and lost. Now there isn't really that one there saying a fallen angels, one who loved and lost, but I kind of interpret it as saying that, where it's like there's two faces of fallen angels, one who loved and one who lost. So Alt would be the one who loved, and Johnny would be the one who lost. And here, which kind of fits with Johnny Silverhand, he's basically describing Alt as someone who totally loved him, and it was just corrupt Arasaka that separated them, and he basically refuses to acknowledge that there might have been issues in their relationship. And it's like, no, I loved her, she loved me, it was a perfect, it was a passion for the ages, while the reality might be a bit more complicated than that. But as you can see, in that sense, it sort of perfectly fits. Now, when we're talking about fallen angels and passion for the ages and all of that, I think it's so important to highlight that this is, you could draw a parallel. I would say it's a reference. It's hard to say explicitly because, in that sense, the author sort of has to confirm if it's actually a reference, but you could interpret it as a reference to John Milton's Paradise Lost. Now, what's kind of funny is a lot of people think that the story of Satan and him falling from heaven and all of that is from the Bible, but a lot of that's not really in the Bible. There's mention of, the devil as soon as the Garden of, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, but you don't really get a lot of context of what happened before. While it's actually John Milton's Paradise Lost, which is an epic poem, which sort of writes what he imagines might have been basically the events leading up to that. And so that's where we sort of get the whole thing of Lucifer being a fallen angel who had a battle against God and all of that. So why would Johnny be drawing a comparison between himself and Alt to Satan / Lucifer with John Milton's Paradise Lost? Well, John Milton's Paradise Lost was sort of considered to be one of the first pieces that really had a sort of punk rock hero who was this rebellious figure, and it went on to inspire so many of the writers of the English Romantic movement, like Lord Byron, who then became sort of the next prototype of, the Byronic hero, who's mad, bad, and dangerous to know, who's a sort of moody, rebellious youth who, is anti-establishment and all of this, but also has this darkness within him that he's brooding on. And that was very much drawing from Lucifer as depicted by John Milton. And so it's one of those pieces of literature that's, argued endlessly about whether John Milton intended for Lucifer to be seen as this sort of anti-hero / like tragic hero, or if it's supposed to be, anti-Lucifer, and it's actually showing that Adam and Eve are, the new heroes and God's good, etc., etc. Percy Shelley and William Blake thought that John Milton was strictly a sort of a Satanist and was pro-Lucifer, and I kind of subscribe to their interpretation of the piece of poetry, rather than actually philosophically of with religion. But in terms of the poem itself, I think that John Milton actually was being kind of a bit of a Satanist, and you can kind of get more information about that by looking at his own life, because he was very much rebellious against the king. he called for this act of iconoclasm where the king would have to be killed rather than exiled, because we have to destroy him fully in order to destroy the relic of it, to basically just like you would destroy false idols and stuff like that. So, in his poem, Lucifer is basically this character who attempts to rebel against God himself. And within the poem, it acknowledges that God is all-powerful and is basically an unstoppable force, but is also this authority figure who is, constantly looking in and spying on Adam and Eve and is ready to punish them right when they, break their promise with him and they eat of the fruit of knowledge and all of that. So it becomes almost this romantic, noble act that Lucifer attempts to rebel and fight against a figure that is so intimidating. I mean, if this God in the poem is an immortal figure who can't really be hurt, is all-knowing. How do you defeat someone who's all-knowing, who can predict your every move and is at all times, all at once, and sort of has all these unknowable powers? But to still know that they have all that power, but to still have enough conviction and belief in your own values and your own morals and your own ideas, and to still attempt to resist against that, is sort of the punk rock spirit. It's sort of that noble smiling in the face of death. So here, Johnny very much sees himself sort of like being a Lucifer Satan figure against Arasaka and against sort of corpos in general, because while he particularly doesn't like Arasaka, he doesn't like any of the corporations that have taken over America. And he gives this great monologue, which we might look at later in this series, where he's, stating that he saw, farmers lose their waters and their crops, and, just the oppression of this sort of corporate America, and how this sort of these corporate powers that seem to have endless money, endless, workers, endless armies, endless influence, how they've taken over and, harmed Night City, etc. And Johnny wants to rebel against that, even though it's just him and a couple other people. So we're going to be seeing this sort of allusion / reference to Paradise Lost later in the song as well. So I just wanted to make sure that we emphasized that. And again, just to say that if you were to actually envision a canvas with two faces, and they're once depicting love and once depicting lost, it's just a really cool image. So let's jump into the next passage now. So now we have this next passage, which again I think is drawing a lot of allusions and comparisons to other pieces of media. And two in particular that I wanted to point out are over here on the right side of the chalkboard. So here is Neil Young's My, Hey, Hey, which was famously quoted in Kurt Cobain's Final Letter. And then we have John Keats's Endymion. And I believe both of these are being referenced to in this piece. So we have A Thing of Beauty will never fade away. And here John Keats, who wrote this, back in the 19th century, put, "A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Its loveliness increases. It will never pass into nothingness, but still will keep a quiet bower for us, and a sleep full of sweet dreams and health and quiet breathing." So here we have a thing of beauty is a joy forever, but we have a thing of beauty, and it will never pass into nothingness, which seems to be basically the exact same sentiment. A thing of beauty will never pass into nothingness. A thing of beauty will never fade away. And then here we have this Neil Young song, which is sort of a grunge punk rock anthem in a way, talking about how rock and roll can never die. But in this one it says it's better to burn out than to fade away. And the use of fade away here rather than passing into nothingness, it feels like they're drawing a comparison between this, because this one's all about sort of the same sentiments of Johnny Silverhand, where it's they give you this but you pay for that, and once you're gone you can never come back. When you're out of the blue and into the black, the king is gone but he's not forgotten. This is the story of a Johnny Rotten, which could basically be Johnny Silverhand. It's better to burn out than it is to rust. The king is gone but he's not forgotten. And Johnny Silverhand doesn't want to be forgotten, and he doesn't want Alt to be forgotten. And again, here we sort of have a thesis of Johnny Silverhand where you're paying for something, but you're getting that instead. And again, it's better to burn out than to fade away. And that line right there is the one which was quoted directly by Kurt Cobain in his, final letter, if you can pick up what I'm saying there. And Kurt Cobain, Johnny Silverhand, again, punk rock spirit, very similar, sort of that grunge spirit. So, yeah, but I think it's very interesting that this song has so many allusions to, like, old poetry. So, like, again, this is a 19th century English romantic poem, and then we have the John Milton poem, which is from even further back than that. But beyond that, beyond these illusions, let's see what we can get from the piece itself. So a thing of beauty I know will never fade away. So again, he's saying that since Alt Cunningham and sort of that also older America, etc., it was a thing of beauty and it won't fade away because it will still keep a quiet bower for us and a sleep full of sweet dreams and health and quiet breathing, which is almost like its memory of that will, comfort us. So the memory of this beauty will comfort us, so it will therefore never fade away. What you did to me, I know, said what you had to say, but a thing of beauty will never fade away. So again, what this person did for them by lighting that candle, lighting the flame for their candle and burning away their hate and showing them what life was missing, that act that they did will never fade away. But what you did to me, I know, said what you had to say, but a thing of beauty. The but here's interesting. Said what you had to say. This almost seems like this is something that only Johnny might know. And if, in the game you were to happen to play flashback and see maybe what happened between Johnny and Alt, and that's my sort of no spoiler/spoiler allusion there, you might get a bit more about what he means here. But if you were someone who was just in the audience of a samurai show at the time, you might not fully know what he's referring to there. He says again, but despite that, a thing of beauty will never fade away. So clearly this person said something that was sort of a harsh truth or, a tough pill to swallow for Johnny, because they did something to him, and he knows that they just said what they had to say, they had to do it. But despite that, a thing of beauty will never fade away. So Johnny Silverhand is a fan of John Keats, confirmed. Also sort of interesting that we got John Keats, John Milton, Johnny Rotten, and Johnny Silverhand. Don't know what to do with that, but it is sort of interesting that they're all Johns. So, all right, onward to the next part. Okay, we're almost to the end here. So now we got this next passage, and we've gotten some, exact rhymes here, which almost makes this sort of like a couplet in a way. And then here we get me and leaving. There's sort of a similar E sound that we get almost with the G and E are sort of similar, but it's not an exact rhyme. Similarly, fear and everywhere, where there's like the ear sound kind of here, but it's not quite perfect, so, but worth mentioning. So here we have, I see your eyes, I know you see me. You're like a ghost, how you're everywhere. I'm your demon, never leaving, a metal soul of rage and fear. That one thing that changed it all, that one sin that caused the fall. So, we'll get into this at the end, but I think this is one of the most revealing passages. But before we get into that, he sees Alt Cunningham's eyes. He knows that she sees him. So here there's sort of like a double play of meanings here, in that Alt sort of actually is a ghost in the machine. Again, cyberpunk spoiler coming up, which is that, you know, she's sort of uploaded into the net and sort of is on the dark net that's like beyond the black wall, and she's sort of like a rogue AI now. And so in that way, she's sort of like a ghost, but he can also just be saying literally like the ghost of her memory, sort of like everywhere he goes, he sees her, in that he sees her basically in his imagination and in his memories. But it's not to say literally, because again, we get like a ghost, which puts this at being a simile. So it's a piece of figurative speech, figurative language, figure of speech. And so here we have you're like a ghost, how you're everywhere. So he's not actually saying they're a ghost, but which is also sort of interesting, because by saying they're not actually a ghost, it sort of plays with like Johnny's kind of like refusal to believe that Alt is dead, which ends up being kind of half true, half not true. But it is interesting that even when he's trying to describe basically the ghost of her haunting him, he can't actually say she is a ghost haunting him. It's just, oh, you're like a ghost, how you're everywhere. And again, because he's seeing her eyes, and he knows that she sees him, because again, sort of a double meaning in that, like literally by being through the cyberspace, since he was also sort of stuck in the cyberspace by being in Soul Killer, he knows that she could probably see him being in that whole space. But also when he wrote this, he was, you know, still alive, obviously, and wasn't in the whole Soul Killer thing. And so he, you know, likes to basically think that she's like looking down on him and sees him, and he's confident of that. So, but also could be seeing him walking around, because she's in the sort of cyberspace, and in this future, dystopian future, there's like tech everywhere. So if someone was like in the internet, they could probably like literally see him through anything, as simple as even a vending machine. But he's her demon, never leaving. It's also sort of interesting, because this is almost a moment of him being honest with himself. It feels like he's just saying like, "Ooh, I'm a demon. I'm, you know, a metal soul of rage and fear." Sort of like this, just like, "Ooh, I'm punk. I'm your demon." However, I think there's a part of Johnny that knows that he was actually pretty toxic for Alt, and that, you know, it wasn't a healthy, good relationship, and almost all of that is his fault. He was a very toxic person who had a lot of issues and put a lot of those issues on Alt. So in that sense, I kind of feel like this line is almost him sort of being honest with himself, but in only the way he can be, which is sort of with this whole metal soul punk rock persona that he has. But he's also kind of acknowledging like, I'm a demon to you, and I'm never leaving, because, you know, I'm sort of like always pull you back in, even if it's not good for you. But it could also be seen as being a sentiment of him being basically like, I'm never leaving, I'm your demon, and that he's not going to give up on her, and he's going to keep trying to pursue saving her and getting her out of that whole net space and bringing her basically back from the dead, because he sort of blames himself for that. So we also have that one thing that changed it all, that one sin that caused the fall. So here we have our next reference to John Milton and Paradise Lost, which is where, because again, the premise of Paradise Lost is basically following how Satan convinced Adam and Eve to eat of the fruit of knowledge, and thus commit the first original sin that caused their fall. And they always say, however, the fall is usually referenced almost to Lucifer, which is, again, is sort of interesting, because you know, because he fell from heaven when he became, you know, a fallen angel. Again, there's fall there again, like the reference to fallen angel. And so what the sin of Lucifer is, which again, what I was trying to say is that it's interesting that even here he's still kind of drawing the image that he is like Lucifer, because also he's the demon. Lucifer's a demon, the devil. But here we have the one sin is pride. And as we see with basically Johnny Silverhand's entire story, it's pride that gets in his way. It's his pride for the sort of samurai band, his pride of not liking that he's being put down by these corporations, and he's prideful, which in that sense can be a good thing because it's the pride that makes him rebellious against the corpos. However, it's also his pride that makes it so that he can't be honest with Alt and be open with her. And it's also his pride that ultimately leads to her demise, because he basically unplugs the internet cable cyberpunk tech that was actually keeping her alive and that she was going to use to re-enter her body. And he stopped that process basically by accident, but also his pride of thinking he knew best. And it's also sort of his pride that keeps him from being honest to basically anyone, including V, because we find out that he's sort of an unreliable narrator. So his big thing is pride. And so in that sense, he's also a very, you could draw a lot of parallels between him and Lucifer. So yeah, very interesting parallels and, sort of like literary references within this punk rock song. So now I think we're ready for the final passage. So here we have the final passage that we're going to be taking a look at in this video, and some of it is just a repeat of the whole John Keats, Neil Young thing that we were taking a look at, where he's saying, a thing of beauty will never fade away. So what I think is more interesting is if we were to almost sort of take these parts out, is that we almost get a bit of foreshadowing. So as, again, major cyberpunk spoiler coming up, but as we know, Johnny basically blows up the Arasaka building, and it seems like what he's actually intending to do with that whole thing was really just to get Alt Cunningham back, or at the very least that's what he's telling V, but again, he's sort of an unreliable narrator. But that might have actually been his motivation rather than just trying to blow up the building and make a political statement. So here we have, what you did to me, I know, you said what you had to say, so they ended on a fight kind of thing, but I'll do my duty, I know, somehow I'll find a way. So here we get a bit of foreshadowing, which is sort of cool, because when he wrote this song and was performing it, it was obviously before his attack on the Arasaka building. So it almost felt like here he was doing sort of like a subliminal messaging, where he was telling people like he's working on something. What is his duty? Now we know. There's sort of that dramatic irony of we know, but the audiences of the song when it came out didn't know what he meant by doing his duty. His duty is to attack Arasaka, or at least that's what he's decided his duty is. So yeah, that's pretty much the only major thing I wanted to point out here. So now I think we can jump into our final thoughts. All right, so I think that is going to conclude our little lyric analysis of Never Fade Away by Samurai from Cyberpunk 2077. I had a lot of fun with this one. I know this one's a bit shorter than some of my other analyses, but I think we found some really cool stuff. I think it's really cool seeing how there's sort of undeniable references to John Keats and John Milton throughout this. And again, I liked our little sort of fun moment of realizing it's Johnny Silverhand, John Milton, John Keats, and Johnny Rodden through Neil Young. So thought that was really cool. And again, I think it's cool how with these references that were being used in this, a lot of the time it's sort of a vague reference, or it doesn't tell you the whole story. So for example, Johnny Silverhand will say that one sin that caused the fall, rather than saying it was pride that caused the fall. But we are able to interpret that and do this sort of close reading process and realize that he's sort of self-acknowledging that pride is sort of his major issue. And as I say that, I also realized it's sort of cool is that Lucifer's pride in Paradise Lost had a lot to do with his own beauty. His beauty was praised so much, basically, that people started to say, well, you could be like equal to God. And that caused the whole war to basically break out. And so in this piece that's discussing a thing of beauty and how beauty will never fade away, will the beauty of Lucifer never fade away? Because in Paradise Lost, he basically becomes sort of disfigured as he falls from heaven. But then at the same time, he's able to sort of change his appearance. And that's why he's able to then trick Adam and Eve. So lots of interesting stuff there as well. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you had fun with this. Hopefully this was something fun to listen to while you had your morning coffee or something like that. If you have any pieces of media you'd like me to take a look at and sort of do a close reading process of and kind of look at through a poetic lens, please feel free to let me know in the comments. And just one other reminder, if you want to join the community and, be notified of when more of these come out, please consider subscribing. But with all that said, I'll see you in the next one, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.